The house that stayed quiet, I started sleeping beside Thomas Whitaker's chair during the last winter. Not because he asked me to, because old men begin sounding different when death enters a house. Their breathing changes first, then the silence around them. Humans rarely notice those things. Dogs do. The chair that sat beside the stone fireplace in a cedar house, tucked deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains outside Asheville, North Carolina. The kind of house that smelled like old paper, pine smoke, wet boots, and years people never fully talked about. Thomas built it himself in 1987, with help from 2 railroad workers and a borrowed cement mixer that broke twice before the foundation cured. He used to joke that the house leaned slightly toward the mountains because even lumber wanted to stay there. He stopped joking near the end. Near the end, he mostly watched the windows. I am Duke, an old German shepherd with stiff hips, clouded eyes, and enough gray around my muzzle to make strangers speak softly when they saw me. Thomas found me 12 years earlier behind a gas station outside Knoxville after somebody abandoned me beside an ice machine during a thunderstorm. He drove 3 hours home with me bleeding on his truck seat and told the veterinarian, "Don't make him young again. Just make him hurt less." That was Thomas. He understood broken things better than healthy people did. The night before he died, snow pressed against the windows hard enough to erase the mountain ridge entirely. The house groaned in the wind. Pipes ticked inside the walls. Claire slept curled on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders, and hospital bills spread across the coffee table. Thomas looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at me. She still thinks keeping people safe means carrying everything alone. His voice sounded like dry paper. I lifted my head. He reached down slowly, fingers trembling from medication, and scratched the side of my neck where the fur had gone white. I made that girl too much like me. Upstairs, the oxygen machine hummed steadily. Outside, freezing rain tapped the roof. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the medicine smell and winter air and exhaustion hanging over the rooms like damp cloth, something else lingered in the house. Regret. Not loud regret. Not dramatic regret. The quiet kind. The kind that sits beside a man for years while he pretends not to see it. Thomas died at 4:12 in the morning. Claire did not cry immediately. She just sat beside the bed holding his hand long after the machine stopped. Humans think grief arrives all at once. It doesn't. First comes silence, then paperwork, then casseroles from neighbors, then phone calls from relatives who suddenly remember your address. The grief comes later, when the refrigerator still smells like the person who bought the groceries. 3 days after the funeral, the house began filling with strangers wearing sympathy like office clothing. Neighbors, church members, men who shook Thomas's hand for 30 years without once asking if he was lonely. I stayed close to Claire through all of it. She moved through the rooms like somebody trying not to wake a sleeping patient. Careful, quiet, tired beyond language. At night, she sat in Thomas's study sorting bills beneath the yellow desk lamp while snow melted from the gutters outside. That was where she found the letter. I remember the exact moment. The desk drawer jammed halfway open. Claire muttered under her breath and pulled harder. Something shifted behind a stack of old receipts. An envelope slid loose. Yellowed paper. Thomas's handwriting. To my children, if silence becomes heavier than truth. Claire stared at it for a very long time before opening it. I watched from the rug beside the heater vent. The room smelled like dust, old tobacco trapped in curtains, and the peppermint lotion Claire rubbed on her wrists when stress headaches started. Her eyes moved across the first page, then stopped. Her breathing changed. No, she sat down slowly. The letter trembled in her hands while wind pushed against the windows. She read until sunrise. Twice she covered her mouth. Once she whispered, "Dad, why?" By morning, her face looked older. That was the thing about truth. Sometimes it aged people faster than grief. The others arrived 4 days later. Ethan first. Always Ethan first. His black Ford truck rolled up the gravel driveway just after noon, carrying the smell of highway rain and expensive coffee. 46 years old, regional development executive. Sharp haircut, clean coat. A man who had learned how to sound calm while remaining permanently angry underneath. He stepped out, looked at the house, then at the mountain ridge disappearing into fog. This place looks smaller. That was the first thing he said after burying his father. Not hello, not how are you holding up. Just that. I watched him from the porch. For a second, something softened in his face when he saw me. Duke, his voice lowered automatically. He walked up the steps and scratched behind my ears exactly the way Thomas taught him years ago. Muscle memory survives, even when tenderness doesn't. Claire opened the door before he knocked. They stared at each other too long, not hostile, not warm. Just tired in ways siblings become after years of avoiding the same conversations. You drove straight through? Claire asked. Yeah. You should have stopped somewhere. So should Dad. The sentence hung there between them. Ethan looked past her into the house. You kept everything the same. Claire folded her arms. It's been 9 days. He nodded once. Then he carried his bags upstairs without another word. Rebecca arrived near sunset in a silver rental SUV, splattered with mud from the mountain roads. She worked as a litigation attorney in Raleigh and moved through life like someone constantly preparing for impact. She hugged Claire hard enough to surprise both of them. Then she saw the oxygen tank still standing beside the recliner, and something inside her collapsed quietly. Oh God, she sat down immediately. Neither sister spoke for almost a minute. The fire cracked softly in the fireplace. Outside, freezing rain rattled against dead leaves. Finally, Rebecca whispered, I thought there'd be more time. Claire looked toward the hallway leading to Thomas's bedroom. So did he. That night, the three of them ate soup around the kitchen table beneath the stopped clock over the stove. 2:17. Nobody wounded. Nobody mentioned it either. Families do strange things after funerals. They speak carefully around ordinary objects as if one wrong sentence might crack the entire room open. Ethan asked practical questions. Insurance, taxes, utilities. Rebecca made notes on a yellow legal pad. Claire mostly listened, and I lay beneath the table smelling tension rising slowly like heat from old pipes. The house itself seemed nervous. Wood creaked differently at night in winter. Wind pushed cold air beneath the doors. Ice clicked in the gutters. Every sound carried farther because Thomas's breathing was no longer there to fill the silence between them. Near midnight, Ethan poured himself bourbon in the study while Claire washed dishes in the kitchen. Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching him. You already called somebody about the property, didn't you? Ethan didn't answer immediately. That meant yes. You're unbelievable, Rebecca said. We need to discuss options. 9 days after the funeral? We can't keep this place forever. Claire entered, carrying towels. Keep what place? Nobody spoke. Then Ethan sighed. Claire, no, you don't even know what I'm saying. I know exactly what you're saying. Ethan rubbed his forehead. The taxes alone are insane. The foundation needs work. Half the wiring is older than I am. Claire folded the towel carefully. So we sell. There it was, simple, clean, like cutting rope. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then at Rebecca. You agree? Rebecca hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than honesty. I think we should at least discuss it. Claire laughed softly, not amused, just wounded. Of course. Ethan leaned back in Thomas's chair. This isn't emotional, it's practical. I saw Claire's eyes flicked toward the letter hidden inside her sweater pocket. Practical. Humans loved that word. They used it whenever things became inconvenient. I'm not selling, Claire said quietly. Ethan stared at her. It's not just your decision, I know. Then don't act like it is. Claire set the towel down. I took care of him here for 18 months. And this house is the last thing that still feels like him. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think he's in the walls? No, Claire whispered. I think we are. Nobody spoke after that. The fire burned lower. Snow started falling again outside. And beneath Claire's sweater, the folded letter waited like a live wire. The next morning, Ethan walked the property with a contractor friend from Asheville named Martin Hale. Broad shoulders, red beard, smelled like diesel fuel and cedar sawdust. They circled the house discussing repairs, while Claire watched from the porch pretending not to listen. Roof's got maybe 3 years left, Martin said. Foundation, salvageable. Claire crossed her arms tighter. The mountain air tasted metallic before snow. Ethan noticed her expression. We're evaluating options. You're evaluating demolition. Martin looked uncomfortable immediately. Good instinct. No, Mom, he said quickly. Just structural assessment. Claire nodded without believing him. After Martin left, Ethan cornered her in the kitchen. You're making this impossible. Claire turned from the sink. You invited a contractor without asking me. I own 1/3 of this property. You own 1/3 of Dad's ashes too. Want to measure those? The sentence hit harder than she intended. Ethan flinched. Then anger returned to cover it. There it is. What? That thing you do. You act like you're the only one grieving. Claire looked stunned. I never said that. You didn't have to. Rebecca entered halfway through the argument and stopped immediately. Jesus Christ. Ethan grabbed his jacket. I'm going for a drive. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the framed photographs in the hallway. One picture fell crooked. Thomas and Margaret Whitaker standing beside the unfinished porch in summer sunlight decades earlier. Margaret laughing at something outside the frame. Thomas looking at her instead of the camera. Claire straightened the frame slowly. Rebecca watched her. "You really won't sell? Know why?" Claire opened her mouth, stopped, then shook her head. Rebecca studied her carefully. "You're hiding something." The room became still. Even the refrigerator hum sounded louder suddenly. Claire turned away too quickly. No, Rebecca's voice softened. "Claire, nothing." I moved closer to her instinctively. Dogs know when truth starts pressing against a person from the inside. That night, Claire barely slept. She sat alone on the back porch, wrapped in Thomas's old flannel coat, whilst snow drifted across the mountains in slow silver sheets. I lay beside her, listening to the distant groan of freight trains moving through the valley. At 2 a.m., she finally unfolded the letter again. Her lips moved silently while she reread certain lines. Then she whispered into the cold dark. "You should burn this, not angry. Heartbroken." Inside the house, Ethan walked downstairs for water and saw her through the kitchen window. He watched without opening the door. Claire didn't notice. But I did. His expression wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Because somewhere deep down, Ethan already knew people did not protect ordinary secrets like that. Sunday morning brought sunlight sharp enough to hurt the eyes. The mountains emerged clean and blue after days of snow. And at 10:30, a black Mercedes SUV rolled up the driveway carrying Carter Wells from Blue Ridge Heritage Properties. 48 years old. Perfect teeth. Cashmere coat. The kind of man who spoke warmly while calculating everything. Ethan met him outside. Rebecca looked furious. "You actually scheduled a buyer?" "It's just exploratory." Claire stepped onto the porch. "No." Carter smiled politely. "Mom, I'm only here to assess." No, the word landed flat and hard. Carter adjusted instantly. Professional men always do. "I understand emotions are high." "You don't understand anything." Ethan lowered his voice. "Claire, stop." But she was already looking at Carter like he was carrying gasoline into a church. "This house is not available." Carter glanced at Ethan. Ethan sighed. "Can we at least walk through?" Claire didn't answer. She simply stepped aside, not permission. Exhaustion. The tour became unbearable almost immediately. Carter complimented the mountain view. Complimented the original stonework. Complimented the acreage. Every sentence sounded like subtraction. Claire grew quieter with each room. Rebecca noticed it too. By the time they reached Thomas's study, the air itself felt strained. Carter touched the doorknob. Claire moved in front of the door instantly. "No." Ethan stared at her. "For God's sake, that room stays closed." "Why?" "Because I said so." Carter lifted both hands slightly. "We can skip it." Ethan ignored him. "What's in there?" Claire's hand moved unconsciously toward her sweater pocket. Tiny movement, but Ethan saw it. And suddenly everything changed. "What do you have?" "Nothing." "Don't lie." Rebecca stepped forward slowly. "Claire." The house went silent around them. No wind, no creaking boards. Even the heater stopped humming. Claire looked trapped. Ethan's voice hardened. "What did Dad leave you?" "Nothing." "Then why are you acting like this?" Carter cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should probably." "Yes," Claire snapped. "You should." He left quickly after that. The front door closed. Gravel crunched beneath his tires as the SUV disappeared down the mountain road. Inside, nobody moved. Then Ethan said quietly, "You found something." Claire stared at the floor. Rebecca's voice trembled slightly. "What is it?" Claire shook her head. "You don't want to know." Ethan laughed once. "That bad?" Claire looked at him finally. "Yes." That answer frightened him more than any dramatic confession could have. He stepped closer. "Show me." "No, Claire, no." The argument that followed wasn't loud at first. That made it worse. Old resentments surfaced slowly like bodies beneath thawing ice. Ethan accusing Claire of controlling access to Thomas during his illness. Claire accusing Ethan of visiting only when convenient. Rebecca trying to mediate until her own anger leaked through. "You don't get to decide what this family can handle." Claire whispered. "You think that's what I'm doing? Then what are you doing?" Claire's eyes filled suddenly. "Trying to save what's left," Ethan snapped. "From what?" And there it was. The moment, the cliff edge. Claire closed her eyes, then reached slowly into her sweater pocket. The envelope looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, more dangerous. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Ethan stared at Thomas's handwriting. "To my children, if silence becomes heavier than truth." Nobody touched it. Claire held it against her chest. "I found it after the funeral." "What does it say?" Rebecca asked. Claire's voice cracked. That mom didn't leave us the way we thought. The room tilted sideways, not physically, emotionally. Ethan sat down hard in the nearest chair. Rebecca looked suddenly pale. Claire continued before courage disappeared. Dad lied. Silence. Then Ethan whispered, "No." Claire nodded. He asked her to leave. Rebecca shook her head immediately. "No, Mom abandoned us." That's what he wanted everyone to believe. Claire unfolded the first page with trembling hands. He lost everything in a failed investment. Loans, debt, the house was almost gone. Mom wanted to sell land to save it. He refused. Then creditors started calling here. Ethan stared blankly. Claire kept going. She agreed to leave temporarily so people would think she took the money instead of him losing it. Rebecca whispered, "Why would she do that?" Claire's answer came quietly. Because she loved him, nobody spoke. The clock above the stove still read 2:17. Claire looked down at the letter. She wrote to us afterward. Dad hid the letters. Ethan's face changed. Not anger now, something worse, disorientation. Claire swallowed hard. She got sick in Oregon, cancer. She wanted to come home. Dad delayed answering because he was ashamed and scared, and by the time he finally wrote back, she was dying. Rebecca covered her mouth. Tears spilled instantly. Ethan looked like somebody had removed gravity from the room. He let us hate her. Claire nodded once. He says in the letter that after enough time passed, he didn't know how to undo the lie. Rebecca sank slowly into a chair. The house creaked softly around them. Outside, sunlight moved across snow-covered pines. Inside, 3 grown adults realized their childhood had been built around a story that never happened. Claire held out the letter. Ethan wouldn't take it. Neither would Rebecca. Finally, Claire whispered, "That's why I didn't want to tell you." Ethan stood abruptly and walked outside, not dramatic, just immediate, like a man leaving a burning room before he understood he was on fire. I followed him onto the porch. He stood at the railing, breathing hard, while cold mountain wind pushed through the trees below. "She missed birthdays," he said finally. Not to me, to himself. She missed everything. I leaned against his leg. Ethan stared toward the ridge. "What kind of father does that?" No answer came. Only wind. Inside the house, Rebecca sat across from Claire at the kitchen table. The letter lay between them like evidence from a crime scene. Rebecca wiped her eyes angrily. "Why would he tell us this now?" Claire laughed weakly. "Because dying people get tired." Rebecca looked at her younger sister for a long moment. "You carried this alone?" Claire nodded. "For 4 days." Rebecca shook her head slowly. "That's not fair." "No," Claire whispered. "It isn't." That night, none of them slept much. Ethan drank bourbon beside the fireplace, staring at photographs. Rebecca read the letter twice more in the study. Claire wandered room to room, touching ordinary objects as though trying to decide whether memory itself could still be trusted. And I moved between them all. Old dogs become custodians eventually, not of houses, of atmosphere. Around 3 in the morning, Ethan entered Thomas's bedroom alone. Moonlight spread across the quilt. The room still smelled faintly like medicine and cedar soap. He sat on the edge of the bed for a very long time. Then he opened the closet. Thomas's coat still hung there. Ethan touched one sleeve and finally broke, not loudly, no screaming. Just one exhausted, middle-aged man crying into his dead father's jacket while the mountains slept outside. The next morning, Rebecca found a locked cedar box in the attic while searching for tax documents. Inside were 31 unopened letters, all addressed in Margaret Whitaker's handwriting. The room went cold instantly. Claire stared at them in horror. Ethan looked sick. Thomas had kept every single letter. Never opened. Never destroyed. Just hidden. Rebecca whispered, "Oh my God." Dust floated through sunlight from the attic window. Nobody touched the letters for nearly a minute. Then Ethan sat heavily on an old trunk. "I can't do this." Claire looked at him. "We don't have to." Rebecca picked up one envelope carefully. Margaret's handwriting curved softly across the paper. "Tom, please let me hear their voices." That one sentence alone nearly destroyed the room. Ethan covered his eyes. Rebecca started crying again. Claire looked like she might be physically ill. Humans think grief arrives in one wave. It doesn't. It comes in layers, one truth after another. One memory rewriting itself while you stand inside it. That afternoon, snow began falling again. Heavy this time. By evening, the mountain road became nearly impossible to drive. Power flickered twice. The house darkened briefly each time before electricity returned. Claire made coffee nobody drank. Rebecca sat beside the unopened letters without moving. Ethan finally spoke near sunset. "Do we read them?" Nobody answered immediately. The fire hissed softly. Wind pushed snow against the windows. Then Claire whispered, "If we do, there's no going back." Rebecca looked at the envelopes. There already isn't. But still nobody opened them, because sometimes humans sense instinctively when pain is about to become permanent. Near midnight, the power finally failed. The house dropped into darkness except for firelight. Outside, snow buried the driveway entirely. Ethan lit candles from the kitchen drawer. Rebecca wrapped herself in blankets. Claire sat on the floor beside me, while the storm pressed against the mountains like an ocean. And in that strange candlelit silence, stripped suddenly of electricity and distraction and escape routes, the three of them began talking honestly for the first time in years. About Thomas, about Margaret, about the versions of themselves they became afterward. Ethan admitted he spent most of adulthood terrified of becoming financially unstable because he blamed his mother for destroying the family. Rebecca admitted she chose law because she became obsessed with preventing chaos. Claire admitted she stayed near home because somebody had to remember things gently. The fire crackled lower, candles flickered, snow buried the world outside deeper and deeper. Then Ethan looked toward the cedar box. Open one. Rebecca hesitated. Claire closed her eyes. Finally, Rebecca selected the oldest envelope carefully and broke the seal. Margaret's words filled the room. Not dramatic, not manipulative, human. She wrote about missing the mountains, about working part-time at a bookstore in Portland while undergoing treatment, about hearing songs in grocery stores that reminded her of Thomas fixing the porch radio every summer, about guilt, about loneliness, about wondering if the children hated her now. Ethan cried silently before the second page ended. Claire listened with both hands over her mouth. Rebecca stopped twice because her voice failed. And somewhere during that storm-filled night, with candlelight trembling against old walls and snow swallowing the world outside, three broken adults finally met their mother again. Not the myth, the woman. The next morning dawn arrived pale and blue over untouched snow. The storm had transformed the mountains completely. Silence stretched for miles. Ethan stood on the porch drinking coffee from Thomas's old thermos. Rebecca joined him wrapped in blankets. Neither spoke for a while. Then Ethan said quietly, "I spent 11 years being angry at a dead woman." Rebecca looked toward the ridge. "We all did. I don't know what to do with that." She nodded slowly. "Neither do I." Inside, Claire placed Margaret's letters carefully back into the cedar box. Not hidden now, just protected. That afternoon, Ethan called Carter Wells. "We're not selling." Carter sounded surprised. "May I ask why?" Ethan looked around the house before answering. "Because some places cost more after you lose them." He hung up before Carter replied. 3 days later, the road finally cleared enough for them to drive into town. They visited Riverside Memorial Cemetery together. Margaret wasn't buried there. Her ashes had been scattered somewhere near Cannon Beach on the Oregon coast, years earlier according to Thomas's letter. But behind the Whitaker family plot stood a small unmarked riverstone beneath an oak tree. Claire stared at it. "Dad put this here." Rebecca touched the stone gently. Ethan's eyes reddened instantly. All those years, Thomas had carried his guilt here alone. Not brave enough to tell the truth, not cruel enough to forget her entirely. The mountain wind moved softly through dead grass. A church bell rang faintly somewhere in town. And standing beside that nameless stone, the three of them finally understood something painful about their father. He had loved Margaret, badly, cowardly sometimes, selfishly often, but truly. And sometimes true love in frightened people becomes damage. On the drive home, nobody spoke much. The mountains rolled past in cold blue shadows. Claire drove, Ethan stared out the window. Rebecca slept lightly against the glass. I rested my head across the back seat and listened to the rhythm of tires over wet pavement. The house looked different when they returned. Not smaller, not sadder, just honest now. The stopped clock still hung above the stove. Thomas's chair still faced the fireplace. Margaret's photograph still leaned slightly crooked in the hallway, but the lies were no longer invisible. And strangely, that made the rooms feel lighter. That evening, they made their decision. Not quickly, not ceremonially, just slowly around bowls of reheated soup while darkness settled across the mountains outside. Rebecca proposed creating a family trust for the property. Ethan agreed to cover immediate repairs. Claire offered to stay temporarily and manage the house until everyone decided what came next. No dramatic speeches followed, just quiet understanding. Then Ethan looked at Claire across the table. "I'm sorry." Claire's eyes filled immediately. "For what?" "For making you carry this alone." She looked down at her hands. I thought if I told you, it would destroy how you remembered him. Rebecca spoke softly. Maybe people aren't meant to survive as symbols. The sentence settled over the room gently. Thomas had not been hero or villain. Margaret had not been saint or abandoner. They had simply been human, weak, loving, frightened, complicated enough to wound each other deeply while still meaning well sometimes. That truth hurt, but it also freed them. Weeks passed. Winter loosened slowly from the mountains. Ethan started visiting more often from Charlotte, usually pretending it was about repairs. Rebecca came on weekends carrying legal folders and wine bottles. Claire remained in the house, though now the silence around her seemed less lonely. Together they repaired gutters, sorted photographs, read Margaret's letters carefully over long evenings by the fire. Some they cried through. Some made them laugh unexpectedly. One described Thomas accidentally setting a grill on fire during a 4th of July picnic. Ethan laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes afterward. God, I forgot that. Claire smiled softly. No, you didn't, and she was right. Humans as rarely lose memories completely. They just bury them beneath anger sometimes. In early spring, they planted a dogwood tree beside the porch for Margaret. No plaque, no announcement, just something alive. Ethan dug the hole. Rebecca straightened the roots. Claire pressed fresh soil down gently with bare hands. I watched from the porch steps beneath warm sunlight. The mountains smelled like wet earth and thawing pine. Somewhere below the ridge, a train horn echoed through the valley. When the planting finished, nobody spoke for a while. Then Ethan looked toward the house. You think Dad knew we'd find the letters? Claire considered that. Finally, she nodded slowly. I think he hoped we would. Rebecca folded her arms against the wind. And the confession? Claire looked toward the mountains. I think he wanted forgiveness without having to ask for it out loud. Nobody argued, because it felt true. That night, Claire carried Thomas's confession and Margaret's letters into the study. The desk lamp cast soft yellow light across the room. Dust drifted lazily through the air. I followed her inside. She sat at the desk for a long time, touching the edges of the paper. Then she placed everything carefully into the cedar box and closed the lid. Not erased, not exposed, simply given rest. She looked at me afterward and smiled sadly. Not every truth belongs to the world, huh? I rested my head against her knee. Outside, my rain began softly against the roof. Inside, the house breathed easier than it had in years. I am old now, older than Thomas ever expected me to become. My hearing fades sometimes at night. Stairs hurt in winter. And lately, I sleep more deeply beside the fireplace where Thomas used to sit. But I still know this. Humans spend much of their lives believing truth and honesty are always the same thing. They are not. Honesty reveals. Truth remains. Sometimes revealing everything heals families. Sometimes it only spreads pain wider. People like Ethan think strength means exposing every wound. People like Claire understand something quieter. That mercy has weight too. Thomas Whitaker made terrible choices. Margaret Whitaker suffered because of them. 3 grown children lost years they could never recover. Nothing about that became beautiful afterward. Life isn't built that way. But in the end, they chose something harder than blame. They chose to let the dead remain human, flawed, loved, incomplete. And maybe that is the closest thing forgiveness ever gets to looking like. The mountains outside Asheville are strange in spring. Fog settles low between the ridges just before dawn, turning the valleys silver. From the porch, the world looks unfinished for a few minutes, soft around the edges, as if even the earth itself understands some things are kinder when not fully exposed to daylight. Sometimes Claire sits beside me out there early in the morning holding coffee in both hands, while the dogwood tree moves gently in mountain wind. Inside the house, Ethan's laughter occasionally echoes from the kitchen now. Rebecca leaves books on tables when she visits. Life continues, quietly, imperfectly, human, and the cedar box remains closed upstairs in Thomas's study. Not hidden out of shame, protected out of love, because not every secret deserves an audience. And sometimes the deepest act of mercy is knowing when the truth has already suffered enough.